Hi, this is Mr. Gideon. So, what about governments that support fixed exchange rate regimes? Well, that's what this section focuses on, where exchange rates are not allowed to fluctuate freely in response to the forces of supply and demand. Instead, central banks buy and sell currencies to maintain an agreed on exchange rate. And what we're really talking about here is saying that we're not going to allow the natural equilibrium in any one foreign exchange market to prevail. We're going to find a way to artificially have the price be higher or lower depending on what we're trying to accomplish. As you can see with these visuals, if you have, like we do in the left diagram, a market where the government's taking some action to have the price of the currency be higher than the equilibrium rate, that's called revaluing or overvaluing currency. On the right-hand side, that would be an example of taking some action to have the price of the currency below the natural equilibrium. It's called devaluing or undervaluing currency. And in these examples, we're using a hypothetical country named Genovia. And so you've got the quantity of genos at the bottom, and then you've got the exchange rate of US dollars per geno on the other axis. Once again, if you feel more comfortable with the way that I taught you to label these, then instead of on the left-hand side having this, you would say just the price of genos in dollars. That's perfectly acceptable, not just for this class, but the AP exam. But why would a government do this? One, governments can eliminate shortages or surpluses in the foreign exchange market for a currency. But even more importantly is number two. Governments can use this as a tool to reduce or eliminate recessionary and inflationary gaps in a very direct way, rather than the indirect way that we described with exchange rates that are allowed to fluctuate on their own. We talked about a central bank in the last lesson that could influence exchange rates, but this is much more direct. Remember though, this is why we care. If you have an appreciation in a currency, ceteris paribus, that leads to the goods of that country becoming more expensive compared to the goods of a foreign country, which leads to a decrease in exports, which leads to a decrease in AD because net exports is one of those components in AD, which leads to a decrease in employment, income, output, price level, as well as an increase in unemployment. If you have a depreciation in a currency, that leads to, ceteris paribus, the goods of that country becoming less expensive compared to the goods of a foreign country, which leads to an increase in their exports, increase in AD, increase in employment, income, output, price level, and a decrease in unemployment. So like fiscal policy and monetary policy, they might have the similar goals in mind when a government chooses this path, and you can think of it as exchange rate policy, using their influence over exchange rates to try to meet similar kinds of goals, get themselves out of a recessionary gap or get themselves out of an inflationary gap. And if you look at these two options, you can see obviously that if a country was in a recessionary gap, they would use the second option. If they were in an inflationary gap, they'd use the first option. So, how do countries fix their exchange rates? The fancy name we give to it is exchange market intervention, when governments buy or sell a currency in a foreign exchange market. So what they do is they go into these markets and they buy up currency to artificially inflate or increase the price or to decrease the price. So going back to our definitions, first, if they wanted to overvalue or revalue a currency, they have a couple of options. They could increase the demand in the foreign exchange market by buying their own currency. And what they do is they use their foreign exchange reserves, which are usually US dollars or euros, to do this. Remember the official reserve account and the balance of payments? I told you to kind of reserve a space in your mind. If you need to, go back to your notes there and take a peek at it. It's the third part of the balance of payments. But in that official reserve account, they should have some dollars, euros, or other currency, whatever is needed, to go ahead and do transactions like are described in option 1. Whether they're trying to overvalue a currency, or like down here, they're trying to devalue a currency, which of course would mean that they would have to decrease the demand in the foreign exchange market by selling their own currency. Alright, what's the second option? Second option, let's go back to overvaluing or revaluing currency, is to increase the interest rate in their country. That would lead to an increase in capital flow into their country. Remember, people are looking for the best interest rates they can find on their savings, so some people in other countries, foreigners, will send their money to this country, and that leads to an increase in the demand for this country's currency by foreigners who want to put their savings there, and also, it decreases the supply of their currency since their own citizens will want to keep their own money inside their country. It's a better place for their savings. Now, of course, the opposite of that is down here. If the country wants to undervalue or devalue their currency, then they'll decrease the interest rate in their country, which would have the opposite effect. It'll make money leave the country. Option 3. Requiring its citizens to get a license to purchase foreign currencies for purchasing imports the government considers really important. So it slows down the pace that citizens can buy foreign currencies at, and that would lead to a decrease in the supply of their country's currency. Slows down that process that we showed with diagrams in the previous lesson, where, for instance, Americans were shifting their supply curve for their currency to the right. It makes that impact less so. And then, of course, the opposite, where a country wants to undervalue or devalue their currency, is to loosen foreign exchange controls, because that's what step 3 is all about. We call this foreign exchange controls, licensing systems that limit the right of individuals to buy foreign currencies. So, which one's best? Fixed exchange rate or flexible exchange rate policy regimes? Well, there's, as you can probably guess, reasons for and against each. In a nutshell, the case for fixed exchange rates is that fixed exchange rates can promote international trade, whereas flexible exchange rates stifle international trade. Major reason being that if you've got a fixed exchange rate in place, then there can be more certainty about the future value of a currency. If I'm doing business with somebody in another country, but the arrangement is that the transaction isn't going to be finalized until a year or two from now, then if there's a flexible exchange rate, I may or may not win out on that exchange when it's finalized in the future. And that's the argument here. The main case against flexible exchange rates is that they break up the world market as well. People are not as much on the same page when they're allowed to let their currency float around. Now, the case for flexible exchange rates. Advocates of the flexible exchange rates maintain that it's better for a nation to adopt policies to meet domestic economic goals than to sacrifice their domestic economic goals to maintain an exchange rate. Because, of course, if governments are going to take the position that they have to focus on exchange rates and try to fix them, then they have to take resources from their, well, they have to take resources to make that happen. And so those resources come from another area that they could have had more impact on with regards to domestic economic policy. Also, if a country is really focused on supporting a fixed exchange rate, they have to keep large reserves of foreign currency that can be quickly exhausted and usually have a low rate of return as an investment. And this really isn't much of a focus on the AP exam, but sometimes I get questions about this, the international monetary system. So I put some notes here for you in case you're interested. Sometimes people have debates that they have to get into in other classes regarding the international monetary system. The one that we have across the globe today is best described as a managed flexible exchange rate system. It operates under flexible exchange rates for the most part, except for occasional intervention by countries or international financial organizations. And of course, as you can guess, there are certain proponents, supporters of the current international monetary system that say that these are the advantages, and there are opponents, of the system that say these are the disadvantages of the current system. And if you haven't done it any time in the recent past, now is a really good time to use this link to go to AP Central's website and look at past free response questions, because there's really no material that we have left that we need to cover that would make it necessary for you to feel like you could answer a whole host, practically any free response question that you're going to be able to find on that website.